Hey friends, Steve Benelek here from Steve Benelek's Mixing and Mastering. Welcome to another weekly tip. So this week I just wanted to share a process that I learned earlier on that really helped me develop my mixing skills. Okay, this process is more of a step-by-step formula to follow. Alright, so it's all about breaking it into smaller sections. So I just want to take a look at some of those sections with you today. This really helped me, so I'm hoping that it will help you as well. Okay, so the first thing was the idea of pre-mixing. Okay, so when we pre-mix, that's when we don't worry about balancing faders or panning. All right, we're concentrating more on any editing, any vocal tuning, any drum tuning, any drum replacements, anything like that, any sound design. Okay, so if we need to create any sounds before we start mixing, this is when we're going to do that. Okay, it's also really important though to realize that mixing starts at tracking too. Okay, so you actually find that the really professional recording engineers, right, actually mix as they go along. Okay, so yes, they have nice outboard gear, but they're always mindful of the, what instrument they're actually choosing to record that music with. Whether what type of snare drum it is and all that kind of stuff. What microphones they're using also plays a big role. Okay, so it's always important to think about that stuff. Now, if you're like me and you only have a home studio, I understand that stuff's not actually always as accessible. Okay, but you can still create good source tones in your own home studio. Get the best that you can, do a little bit of research on what microphones will work and help you. Okay, and just make sure that you're thinking about the mixing stage while you're recording and getting the best possible source tones that you can, that are working together as you're recording them. Okay, so now that brings us to the process when it comes to the mixing stage. All right, we've done all of our pre-mixing, we've got the best source tones that we can, now we're ready to mix. So these are the steps, all right? The first step is a static mix. A static mix is when you import all of your audio into your session. You've got your session completely laid out how you want it to, so everything's routed, you got all your color coding done, everything's named beautifully, all right? You're ready to start mixing. So the static mix is when we get a volume balance between the faders, right? We balance all the instruments nicely, and then we do our panning as well, okay? You want to spend a lot of time on this because don't underestimate the value of the volume fader. Sometimes things just simply need to be either turned up or turned down. Okay, not everything needs to be affected, and the volume can do just as good a job sometimes. And the same with panning. All right, panning is one of the steps of separating and isolating some of the instruments away from the middle. Okay, so it's also, those two things are very, very important, and they also build a really strong foundation for the rest of the mix to sit on. Okay, so really spend a good time on your static mix. Now, from after the static mix, the second step then is to EQ. So this is where I would subtractive EQ. I would take out any resonances that I didn't want to be there. This would be also where I would try and fit my instruments together if there was some masking, like in a previous video, fitting the kick and the bass together. It could be trying to create space for two guitars, one on the left, one on the right, so that they're sitting, creating a wider sort of stereo field because they're in different pockets of the EQ spectrum. Could be carving out place for your vocal to sit, any of that kind of stuff, so that you get a really nice no masking and nice separation, and then your panning's just enhancing that as well. Okay, so that's what I would do then. The next thing I would do then, the third step, is then to compress anything that needs compressing. Alright, so not everything has to be compressed. Alright, all we want to do is, we're not trying to squash everything so all the dynamics go. we just want to try and get the overall dynamic range a little bit more consistent so that it's going to allow us to mix it a little bit easier. Okay. It's not the only role of a compressor, but it's one thing that you want to try and do if something's continually either being masked. 1 minute you can hear it, next minute you can't. That's when you want to compress it. Okay. We'll talk about the other, when you use a compressor to shape the tone of something. I would probably do that. I mean, you could do that now as well and start shaping that then. But I would first of all make sure that everything was sitting nicely first. Alright, so then once we've got a good static mix, we've got no problem frequencies anymore, everything's nicely compressed and playing nicely together. This is now when I would start adding effects. Okay, so this is where we start putting like a bit of a three-dimensional feel to our mix. So we create depth, height, and the width. Okay, so this is a great time to start doing your vocal effects, and it's a good rule of thumb that you don't really want to hear the effects. All right, you want to feel that they're there. You don't want it to sound dry, but you don't want to actually physically hear the reverb or the delay unless it's intentional for a certain part that you're trying to enhance. Okay, so a good rule of thumb is to make sure that you can hear the effect and then just dial it back a little bit. So once you've got all your effects done, everything's sounding nice, like it's within the same space and working nicely together, then we move on to our last step, which is automation. Okay. Now automation is super crucial to getting a good mix. Okay. This is when most of the time you've got a good balance throughout your whole song, but the chances are that it's not going to be there for the whole length of the song, that it doesn't want to stay in the same spot, that it's just a little bit low here or it's a little bit low there. This is where automation is going to make sure that every single word is heard. All right, all the tails of your words are brought up because that's where the emotion is in the vocal as well. Okay, it's where you can emphasize like cymbal hits at the beginnings of choruses, or automate your mix bus so that it has a nice dynamic flow throughout the mix. This is almost like where a mixing engineer gets to sort of be a member of the band, so to speak, and really ride a fader in real time like a musical instrument and put the dynamics back into the music. Because when you've got a heavy compressed mix, you're squashing that dynamic range. So automation allows you to put some of that dynamic back in again. All right, so it's very important. And to be honest, I get a little bit lazy with automating when I have to do it manually. I shouldn't. That's a downside that I go through. But the way that I'm going to solve that is I'm going to invest in like a little fader port, which is just a single fader, which is going to allow me to actually do it in real time, or like a controller that'll have a few sort of faders that I can mix with. And I think what that's going to allow me to do then is actually write my automation in real time and allow me to be more creative and musical. And that was a key that I just said there, to be creative. When we're mixing, we want to stay as creative as possible. We don't want to get out of that creative mode and need to render audio or, need to add samples or, if you have to, then you have to. But that's the whole idea of the pre-mix, okay? So that you can just stay in that creative mode and, get the job done. So let's just go over that again. We've got our pre-mixing, and then static mix, all right, faders and panning. Then secondly is EQ, all right, that's fitting all the instruments together. Step 3 is compressing, reducing dynamic range or tone shaping, using the compressor to shape the instrument. Okay. Then we're adding our effects, all right, so we're making the mix more three-dimensional. And then we're automating it to make sure that everything has vibe, energy, everything can be heard and sits nicely within the mix. Okay, so this really helped me out a lot, and I hope it helps you out too. I would love to hear your thoughts on it, and if you're on Facebook, you can come and join our group. Alright, so it's Steve Benelek, Mixing and Mastering dash community. So come and join in. It's absolutely fantastic group. So many amazing engineers in there, and everyone is so helpful and supportive. So it's such a great group, and I couldn't be more proud to be a part of it. So please come and join us in the group. If you would like to have some more one-on-one kind of mixing lessons, I offer Skype lessons where you can actually hear the audio coming out of my Pro Tools, and not just through like a microphone. You'll hear it as if it was coming out of your own speakers in your own session. Okay, so the quality is quite good. And so if you'd like to do that, you can send me an email at sb.audioproduction@gmail.com. All right, or you can join in the group and feel free to send me a message, and I'd be more than happy to organize a free introduction lesson to get things started. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me for this week's tip. And if you have any questions or anything else you would like to add, please feel free to in the comments, and I'll make sure that I put the links to everything in the description to this video as well. I look forward to hearing if you've never sort of thought of it this way. If you give it a go on your next mix, I would love to know how it went for you and if it helped. And the last thing I would just like to say, have that step-by-step plan, but only focus on one thing at a time and then work your way through them. Alright, thanks for joining me again, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Take care, guys. Bye.